You never know what's going to show up in your YouTube feed, and recently YouTube has been sending me a message. They've been showing me a lot of videos on sinking kayaks. So I got worried about that, and I think I have a solution. Welcome back. If you're new to the channel, we cover kayak modifications, spin, and fly fishing. So poke that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. Do you believe your kayak won't sink? Well, it won't, but it won't be recoverable to where you can get back in it. Check out what Phil Walton on his channel did when he tested the flotation of a kayak.
The boat is now literally completely filled with water. We would recommend, because the boat still floats, to get on the end and swim it to the shallows.
And there was no way you're going to be able to use your pump to pull out the water from inside that kayak, because the outside water level is level with the hatches. So you're screwed. You gotta swim it back. So here's a worst case scenario from the Island Hooking channel that would just have me terrified. Check this out. Here's a disaster that can happen with a crack. It starts to fill up, your gear weighs it down, and you're struggling to stay afloat.
Maybe we can make it in. Lucky we was only 5 miles out.
At this point, he's swimming the kayak in. He's lucky he had a friend with him. Boy, I'm just so glad that Dan was in shape and could pull his buddy back 5 miles to shore. So let me show you my approach to trying to sink-proof my kayak, and then I'm in this pool. We'll test whether it works or not. To understand my solution, you have to understand what makes a boat float in the first place. And basically, anything will float if its weight and volume is less than the weight of the water it's going to displace. So that's why you see bulkheads on ships to capture a dead airspace, because air weighs less than water. So what's the equivalent on the kayak? Well, if you pop open your hatch, down in there is nothing but air. So kayaks will sink if the air is displaced, water comes in, and basically it gets to be equilibrium with the water, surrounding water. And why it would sink is you've got all the gear piled on top that's not displacing anything. It's not buoyant, it won't float. So I realized that if I fill up the dead airspace inside the hull of this that I'm not going to use, I'm only using the section up here in the front and the back, I'm not using the channels that go down both sides. If I fill that up with something that's buoyant and won't let water fill that same space, then I've got a better shot at keeping this kayak afloat. So what better material to use than these cheap pool noodles you can get at the dollar store? So I'm going to take these and I'm going to feed them down into the channels of my kayak, stuff it full, and that way water won't be able to get in, and so my flotation should improve. Looking down the channel underneath my boat, you can see that there's plenty of room down here to stuff some pool noodles. Well, I'm all done here. I've got all these pool noodles stuffed up in here, and the answer is it took 30 of them to fill up this Jackson Coosa. You can also see that I decided to leave the hole open, because that way water would be able to drain better if water does get in here. I want water to be able to flow all the way up to my drain plug. So I decided not to try and squish them in here and close that middle hole. I couldn't fill it up all the way on the inside just by pulling down on one end or the other, so I decided to just fill it up with a hose to simulate that worst case condition. So you can see my front hatch is totally full. I've got water in the bed, but it looks like as a result of having these pool noodles, the back still has plenty of room and it's still floating well. So there's definitive proof that I can't get back on it, even with the pool noodles inside. However, I don't have the situation that occurred on Phil Holland's video where it was totally full above the level of the hatches. So now, floating in my PFD, I can sit here and I can pump out this water to the point where I can eventually get back on. And one thing I learned, that when you can get back on, take your heavy drive unit out of the front, put it in the back, because then you can get up closer to your front hatch where it's a lot easier to pump out the rest of the water. One of the things I realized as I was playing around trying to figure out the best way to get the water out of the front was that if you kneel down near your drive unit, that is a very risky proposition, and it could be a death trap. You could get your leg caught up under one of the pedals, and if the kayak rolled over, then you're kind of sunk unless your drive unit has a quick release that you can do when you're underwater. So do like I suggested, take out the drive unit, put it in the back of the kayak. It's going to help balance the weight back there and keep this away from your knees and your legs when you're pumping the water out. Potential death trap. I need to make one critically important point. Before you do any practice on recovery, be sure you're not doing it by yourself. Have someone else there spotting for you in case you get into trouble. Even if you're doing it in a pool like I did, be sure you have your PFD on. You just don't know what can happen. So have a spotter, use your PFD, be very careful of your drive unit if you've got a pedal kayak. So I think this pool noodle idea is a winner because it's keeping my kayak above the level of the water where I can do the self-recovery with the pump. I think this falls in the category of better than nothing. If you guys have a good idea of how to improve the floatability of your kayak, I'm all ears. And now I got to get all this water out so I can get this dang thing out of the pool because it's heavy. Throw your comments down below. Thanks.